There comes a moment in a woman's life, especially a Sigma woman, where her heart quietly says, "No more half-love," not because she's bitter, not because she's cold, but because she finally understands the cost of giving more than she receives. And somewhere in her 30s, something shifts. She stops chasing potential and starts honoring truth. She stops trying to interpret mixed signals and starts listening to her inner peace. And once that shift happens, she can't go back, not even if she tried. So if you're listening to this right now, maybe you've felt it too. That quiet breaking point where love is no longer about butterflies or intensity, but about stability, safety, clarity. Maybe you've outgrown the beautiful lies of almost, maybe, and someday. Maybe you've reached a kind of emotional adulthood, one that doesn't fight for crumbs anymore. You don't want a love that drains you. You want a love that meets you, gently, consistently, honestly, and if that's where you are, you're not alone. So many Sigma women feel this shift in their 30s, the shift where they stop apologizing for wanting something real. The truth is, a Sigma woman in her 30s has already lived enough life to understand what connection should feel like. She's been patient, she's been understanding, she's held space, she's forgiven more than she should have. She's invested in the wrong people with the right heart. And in the process, she learned something powerful. Half-love feels worse than being alone. Because half-love keeps you waiting. Half-love keeps you guessing. Half-love makes you shrink yourself to fit someone else's emotional comfort zone. And the Sigma woman, she's not built for smallness. Her spirit naturally expands. Her mind is deep. Her emotional world is rich. She has layers, not edges. So when someone gives her barely enough affection to keep her hoping, she feels it like a bruise on her self-worth. That's why she stops tolerating it, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Let's be honest, it hurts when you realize you were surviving off the bare minimum. It hurts to admit that you kept accepting almost love because you believed one day it would become whole. It hurts when someone benefits from the softness you offered while giving you nothing steady to hold on to. Okay, now let's see why Sigma women in their 30s don't tolerate half-love anymore. 1. She finally understands her emotional capacity, and that shift changes everything about how she loves. In her 20s, she poured herself into people who didn't always know how to hold what she offered. She cared deeply, sometimes too deeply, without noticing how much of her energy was being spent on relationships that weren't built to last. She tried to be understanding. She tried to be patient. She tried to give people the benefit of the doubt because she believed effort could make anything work if both hearts were willing. But the truth was, not everyone she chose had the emotional maturity to meet her halfway. Some loved inconsistently. Some loved only when it benefited them. Some loved the idea of her strength more than the reality of her needs. And she didn't see it clearly then, because she was still learning the shape of her own heart. She didn't yet understand how deep her emotional world truly ran. She didn't realize how much she was giving away without receiving anything meaningful back. By the time she enters her 30s, everything feels different. Experience has softened her in some ways and sharpened her in others. She knows the value of her care now, not just because she's older, but because she's finally paid attention to how much she holds inside her. She knows she doesn't love halfway. She knows when she commits with intention. She knows her affection isn't casual and her loyalty isn't cheap, so she becomes far more selective about where her heart goes. She won't waste her emotional depth on someone who treats her presence like background noise. She won't give softness to someone who hasn't shown that they know how to hold it. She won't stretch herself for someone who only shows up when it's convenient. She finally understands that her emotional capacity is a gift, not a service. It's something that needs to be matched, not taken advantage of. And this understanding shifts how she shows up in relationships. She pays attention to who listens, not just who talks. She watches who stays consistent, not just who shows charm in the beginning. She notices who tries, not just who promises they will. She refuses to be the emotional anchor for someone who won't even steady themselves. And she doesn't apologize for this clarity. She doesn't defend it. She doesn't water it down to seem less demanding. She simply knows what she brings and what it deserves in return. In her 20s, she loved with hope. In her 30s, she loves with awareness. She's not closed off, she's not bitter, she's not unreachable. She's just done giving pieces of herself to people who haven't earned the privilege. And that shift isn't hard or cold. It's honest. It's the kind of honesty that comes from finally understanding the depth of her own heart and choosing to protect it with the same care she once gave to everyone else. 2. Her time means more to her now, and that single shift rewrites the way she approaches love. In her 20s, she treated time like something she could give freely without thinking twice. She stayed in conversations that drained her. She entertained almost relationships that never became real. She waited for men who were confused, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable. She showed up for people who showed up only when it suited them. She didn't realize how much of her energy was being scattered across connections that didn't feed her spirit. Back then, she thought patience was the answer to everything. She believed giving people space to grow would eventually turn into something meaningful. She thought her understanding nature was an advantage, something that made relationships easier. But slowly, she began to see that not everyone deserved unlimited access to her time. Some people didn't grow, some didn't match her effort, some only reached out when they felt lonely, not because they truly valued her, and by her 30s she learned to read those patterns instantly. She knows now that time is not something she hands out casually. She's worked hard for her peace, her stability, her emotional balance. She's built a life that feels good to wake up to, so anyone who steps into that life must add to it, not drain it. If someone wants to be part of her world, they have to show consistency, not just occasional effort. They have to meet her energy, not wait for her to carry the emotional weight of the connection. They have to make time for her, not squeeze her into whatever's left at the end of their day. She no longer entertains vague connections, half-interest, or passive affection. If someone can't offer real presence, she doesn't chase them. If someone disappears and returns with excuses, she doesn't reward that behavior with attention. If someone treats her like an option, she removes herself quietly. She isn't cold. She's aware. She understands that every minute she gives to the wrong person is a minute she takes away from herself, her peace, and the relationships that actually matter. She isn't impressed by late-night messages or sudden bursts of charm. She watches for consistency. She watches for effort. She watches for emotional accountability. And if those things aren't there, she saves her time instead of giving it away. She values slow mornings, quiet evenings, friendships that feel real, projects that excite her, and the calm she fought to build. She knows now that time is the most intimate thing she can offer. And in her 30s, she refuses to offer it to someone who shows up with half love, half effort, or half presence. She'd rather be alone with her peace than together with someone who doesn't honor her time. That's not bitterness. That's growth. That's clarity. That's a Sigma woman finally recognizing the worth of her hours, her heart, and her life. Hold on for a second. If any part of this already feels a little too familiar, tap the like button so I know you're hearing me. Okay, let's move to the next point. 3. She's outgrown relationships built on potential, and that realization becomes one of the clearest turning points in her 30s. In her 20s, she was willing to invest in possibility. She believed in what someone could become, not just who they were in the moment. She saw the good in people, even when they weren't showing it consistently. She made excuses for emotional unavailability. She waited for someone to mature into the partner she hoped they could be. She held on to words like one day, soon, and I'm trying, even when the actions never matched. She poured hope into relationships that required her to shrink her needs while the other person figured out theirs. She convinced herself that patience was a form of loyalty, but the truth she eventually learned is that hope can become a trap when it's the only thing holding a relationship together. By the time she reaches her 30s, her lens becomes sharper. She no longer romanticizes potential. She looks at reality. She looks at consistency. She looks at emotional readiness. She looks at whether the person in front of her is actually capable of showing up for her, right now, not in some distant future that requires her to wait endlessly. She doesn't blame her younger self for believing in people. That version of her had a soft heart, a patient nature, and a willingness to grow with someone. But experience has taught her that not everyone grows at the same pace, and not everyone intends to grow at all. She's tired of dating versions of men she has to mentally upgrade just to feel like the relationship has potential. She's tired of imagining the future she wishes she could have rather than acknowledging the present she actually has. She no longer accepts emotional crumbs because she sees the cost of doing so. Waiting for someone to change is exhausting. Loving someone's potential is lonely. And holding on to fantasies of who someone could become keeps her from seeing who they are right now. In her 30s, she chooses alignment over imagination. She wants someone whose present self already matches the kind of connection she desires, someone who doesn't need to be coaxed into effort, someone who doesn't require constant emotional education, someone who doesn't treat growth like a suggestion. She listens to actions, not promises. She pays attention to patterns, not potential. If he's not emotionally open now, she doesn't assume he will be later. If he can't communicate now, she doesn't hope he'll magically learn. If he can't meet her halfway now, she doesn't offer to walk the whole distance. She doesn't resent the men who aren't ready. She simply stops choosing them. She's done being the woman who waits for someone to become the partner she needs. She's done being patient at the expense of her own emotional well-being. Potential might have been enough for her younger self, but her 30s demand something real, something present, something whole. She no longer builds relationships based on what she hopes will happen. She builds them on what's actually happening. And that shift saves her from heartbreak she no longer has time for. 4. She recognizes manipulation faster now, and that single skill protects her from the kind of half-love she used to tolerate without realizing it. In her 20s, emotional manipulation didn't always look obvious. It came wrapped in charm, affection, and almost love. It sounded like mixed signals disguised as depth, or excuses presented as vulnerability. She didn't always catch the subtle shifts, the delayed responses meant to keep her guessing, the sudden affection when she started pulling away, the silence used to regain control. Back then she thought she was overthinking. She thought she needed to be more patient, more understanding, more flexible. She gave people the benefit of the doubt even when their behavior consistently chipped at her peace. But her 30s sharpen everything. Experience becomes a built-in filter. She sees patterns instantly now, guilt-tripping, emotional withholding, love-bombing followed by distance, the sudden warmth that appears only when she becomes less available. She doesn't fall for confusion disguised as mystery. She doesn't fall for inconsistency disguised as complexity. She doesn't fall for men who reset the connection only when it benefits them. She recognizes when someone is using charm instead of accountability. She recognizes when someone uses silence to punish rather than communicate. She recognizes when someone is trying to keep her emotionally uncertain because uncertainty makes her easier to control. Instead of doubting herself, she questions the behavior. Instead of adjusting her standards, she examines their intentions. Instead of enduring emotional games, she steps back and pays attention to the effect someone has on her mental state. She no longer interprets manipulation as passion or chemistry. She sees that true connection doesn't require emotional turbulence to feel alive, and she doesn't need to explain or announce her realizations. Once she notices a red flag, she doesn't wait for it to turn into something larger. She trusts her first instinct. She chooses distance before damage. She chooses clarity over hope. She chooses her peace over his excuses. This version of her doesn't get pulled into conversations that twist her feelings. She doesn't argue with someone who refuses to understand her. She doesn't internalize someone else's immaturity. If a man is inconsistent, she steps back. If he's evasive, she stops asking. If his words and actions don't match, she believes the actions. If he creates emotional confusion, she removes herself from the situation entirely. What used to take her months to understand now takes her minutes. What used to drain her now teaches her. She isn't harsh, she's aware. She isn't cold, she's self-protective. She isn't unforgiving, she's uninterested in being drained. Recognizing manipulation early isn't about fear, it's about wisdom. It's about honoring her emotional capacity instead of letting someone twist it. In her 30s, she no longer falls for half love disguised as almost love. She sees through it, and she walks away before it costs her the softness she worked years to rebuild. Quick pause. If you relate to this season of knowing your worth, drop a single word in the comments that describes where you are right now. It might help another woman feel less alone. All right, next point. 5. She wants depth, not drama, and that shift becomes one of the clearest emotional boundaries she develops in her 30s. In her 20s, she didn't actively seek drama, but she tolerated relationships that carried a certain level of emotional noise. The hot and cold affection, the tension that came before clarity, the unpredictable highs that made the lows feel justified. She mistook intensity for intimacy. She thought the chaos meant passion, or connection, or something worth fighting for. She didn't realize at the time that much of that chaos came from immaturity, inconsistency, and emotional unavailability packaged as something meaningful. As she grows older, she notices how exhausting that kind of dynamic really is. She sees that drama isn't depth, it's instability. It doesn't create closeness, it creates dependence. It doesn't strengthen connection, it clouds judgment. And she's simply outgrown it. A Sigma woman's 30s are about emotional clarity. She wants peace in her connections, not because she's fragile, but because her mind and heart function best in steady environments. She wants conversations that feel grounding, not arguments that leave her drained for days. She wants honesty without hidden intentions. She wants effort without emotional games. She wants someone who can sit with her calmly instead of someone who pushes her into emotional corners just to feel powerful. Depth to her means understanding, not intensity. It means consistency, not unpredictability. It means listening with presence, not reacting with ego. She has learned that real intimacy is built in low conversations, soft honesty, shared silence, consistent energy, and emotional transparency. She wants someone who is capable of meeting her in those spaces, someone who doesn't confuse chaos with chemistry, someone who doesn't rely on tension to keep the relationship alive, someone who doesn't disappear to provoke desire or reappear to regain control. She wants a partner whose presence feels like a safe place to land, not a battlefield to survive. She's tired of men who stir up drama to avoid taking responsibility, tired of emotional roller coasters that lead nowhere, tired of connections that thrive only on adrenaline instead of genuine emotional understanding. Depth requires maturity, and by her 30s, she can sense maturity within minutes. She sees it in how someone speaks, how they approach conflict, how they handle discomfort, how they show care. When someone offers chaos, she feels her body tighten. When someone offers depth, she feels her whole system breathe, and she listens to that difference now. She doesn't chase the spark that burns out quickly. She chooses the flame that lasts. She doesn't stay with someone who brings excitement, but no emotional safety. She chooses someone who brings calm without losing passion. She doesn't try to fix or deepen connections that can't stand on steady ground. She wants a love that nourishes, not exhausts. A relationship that softens her, not drains her. A partnership that feels peaceful, not performative. In her 30s, she refuses to mistake drama for depth ever again. She knows better now, and she chooses better because of it. 6. She isn't afraid of being alone anymore, and that inner shift changes the entire way she approaches love in her 30s. In her 20s, she didn't mind solitude, but there were moments when loneliness felt heavier than she wanted to admit. She wondered if something was wrong with her for being so independent. She wondered if she needed to soften herself just to be chosen. She wondered if love required sacrificing parts of her routine, her peace, and her sense of self just to make space for someone else. And even though she valued her alone time, there was still that quiet fear lingering in the background. What if this independence becomes a problem one day? What if she ends up alone because she refuses to settle? But by the time she reaches her 30s, that fear dissolves. She's lived enough life to know that being alone isn't a punishment. It's clarity. It's comfort. It's emotional stability. It's the ability to breathe in her own space without negotiating her needs. She has built a life she genuinely enjoys. Her work, her home, her routines, her peace, her growth. Her solitude no longer feels like a waiting room. It feels like a home she designed herself. So when someone enters her life now, they're stepping into a world that already has structure, beauty, and purpose. She doesn't cling to anyone out of fear that she'll lose something essential. She doesn't tolerate half-love because she's scared of starting over. She doesn't pretend to be satisfied with emotional scraps just to avoid being single. She knows what it feels like to be alone and happy, and once she knows that, settling becomes impossible. She doesn't date to fill a void. She doesn't accept inconsistent affection because it's better than nothing. She doesn't fear silence or empty weekends. She'd rather spend the evening by herself than sit across from someone who makes her feel misunderstood or unseen. And this confidence changes the dynamic with every man she meets. She doesn't fall into relationships accidentally. She chooses intentionally. She doesn't chase. She observes. She doesn't try to force connection. She lets energy reveal itself. If someone brings chaos, she steps back. If someone brings confusion, she refuses to interpret it as chemistry. If someone brings half effort, she doesn't wait for the other half. The fear of being alone used to whisper, "Maybe give him more time." Now her inner voice says, "You're fine without this." She doesn't need a man to complete her life. She wants a partner who complements it. She doesn't need constant affection to feel secure. She needs emotional honesty and presence. And she doesn't date from emptiness. She dates from fullness. That is why, in her 30s, half-love cannot survive in her world. She isn't afraid of losing anyone. She's only afraid of losing herself again. And that fear keeps her standards exactly where they belong. Before we go on, make sure you're subscribed. I want you here for the rest of this series. Now, let's keep going. 7. She notices effort more than promises now, and that shift rewires the way she reads love. In her 20s, promises sounded comforting. Words felt warm. Future plans, hopeful statements, sweet reassurances. They gave her something to hold on to, especially when the relationship itself felt unstable. She wanted to believe people when they said they would do better, show up more, change, grow, choose her fully. And because her heart was honest, she assumed theirs was too. But over time, she saw the gap between what people said and what they actually did. She saw how easy it was for someone to promise the world when they were losing her, yet offer very little when she was right beside them. She noticed how men could talk about commitment while acting like it was optional. She watched how words flowed freely during emotional conversations, but the follow-through never came. Eventually, she learned that promises without action don't hold weight. They're just placeholders, keeping her emotionally invested in something that may never become real. By her 30s, she no longer leans on potential or poetic phrases. She watches behavior. She watches consistency. She watches how someone treats her on the days that aren't convenient. She pays attention to the little things, not the grand declarations. Does he show up when he says he will? Does he keep his word on small commitments? Does he match her energy without needing to be asked? Does he take accountability when he falls short? Does he make space for her, or just promise that he will someday? These are the things she tracks now, not because she's judging, but because she finally understands that intention without action is just decoration. She no longer gives emotional credit for effort that never arrives. She doesn't melt when someone says, "I miss you." She looks at whether they make time to actually see her. She doesn't get swept away by, "I'll do better." She watches to see if the pattern changes. She doesn't cling to, "I care about you." She notices if he's present enough for her to actually feel cared for. Effort doesn't need dramatic displays. It shows up quietly. in consistency, in communication, in emotional presence, in choosing her even when life gets busy, in making room for the relationship instead of relying on her to carry all the weight. Promises used to excite her. Now they make her pause. She needs something real, something steady, something grounded in action. Half-love often survives on beautiful words that never materialize. Whole love shows itself through effort she can see, feel, and trust. And the moment she realizes someone can't offer that effort, she steps back without guilt. She no longer waits for someone to become the partner they claim they are. She believes what the actions reveal, not the fantasy the words create. In her 30s, she has no interest in potential without proof. She wants love she can touch, not love she has to imagine. 8. She knows what real partnership feels like now, and that clarity makes half-love impossible to accept. In her 20s, she had glimpses of what a healthy bond looked like, but she didn't always trust those moments. She was still experimenting, still learning, still figuring out what she truly needed. She tolerated imbalances because she didn't yet understand how good a relationship could feel when both people were emotionally present. She mistook intensity for intimacy, consistency for clinginess, and bare minimum affection for effort. She didn't know any better because she hadn't yet experienced the kind of partnership that aligns with her depth. But by her 30s, she's had enough interactions, enough heartbreaks, enough almost loves to understand what real partnership actually looks like. It feels steady, not shaky. It feels honest, not confusing. It feels warm, not draining. She knows now that real connection doesn't require her to shrink. It doesn't ask her to be less expressive or less ambitious. It doesn't punish her independence or make her feel guilty for having boundaries. A real partner meets her where she stands instead of pulling her off balance. A real partner listens to her without treating her words like an inconvenience. A real partner shows up with consistency, not bursts of affection followed by long disappearances. A real partner doesn't see her strength as competition or her softness as weakness. Real partnership feels like two people choosing each other intentionally, not desperately. It feels like emotional safety she doesn't have to earn. It feels like conversations that leave her feeling understood instead of overwhelmed. It feels like trust that grows over time instead of being questioned at every turn. And because she's experienced even a small taste of that, she refuses anything less. She knows what it feels like when someone actually values her, when they make her part of their world without taking away her freedom. She knows how peaceful it feels when someone is emotionally consistent. She knows how reassuring it is when someone communicates clearly instead of playing games. She knows how grounding it is to be with someone who supports her growth instead of fearing it. And knowing all of this makes half-love feel unbearable. She can't pretend she's satisfied with a connection where she's always guessing. She can't force herself to be content with someone who shows up when it's convenient. She can't stay in relationships where she carries the emotional workload alone. Once she feels what real partnership is supposed to feel like, her standards don't rise. They stabilize. They become exact, accurate, clear. She no longer negotiates with confusion. She no longer tries to fix someone who isn't emotionally present. She no longer pours herself into connections that don't nurture her. She chooses the love that mirrors her maturity, not the love that mirrors her wounds. In her 30s, she finally understands. Partnership should feel like alignment, not struggle, and anything less simply isn't worth her heart. 9. She finally chooses herself with both hands, and that choice becomes the core reason she no longer entertains half-love in her 30s. In her 20s, she understood the idea of self-worth, but she didn't always live by it. She knew she deserved more, yet she still gave second chances to people who didn't know how to show up. She stayed longer than she should have in situations where she wasn't being met emotionally. She tried to be understanding, tried to see the good, tried to carry the connection through periods when the other person barely lifted any weight at all. She didn't do this because she lacked strength. She did it because she had hope, softness, and a willingness to try again. She thought effort could fix misalignment. She thought patience could turn half-love into whole love. She thought sacrificing a little piece of herself here and there was normal if it kept the relationship going. But slowly, those small sacrifices added up. The things she let slide, the moments she swallowed her feelings, the loneliness she felt next to someone who claimed to care. Eventually, she saw that every time she put someone else's comfort above her own emotional needs, she chipped away at herself. By her 30s, she refuses to do that anymore. Something shifts inside her. She realizes that choosing herself isn't selfish, it's necessary. It's the foundation for any healthy connection she will ever build. She doesn't abandon her needs just to maintain closeness. She doesn't silence her wants to avoid conflict. She doesn't settle for breadcrumbs because she remembers how empty they feel once the excitement wears off. Choosing herself looks different now. It looks like walking away from someone she loves because she knows they aren't loving her fully. It looks like not texting first when she feels the energy shift. It looks like saying no to people who drain her. It looks like choosing peace over passion that leaves her exhausted. It looks like protecting her heart even when no one else understands why she's doing it. And the most powerful part? She doesn't apologize for any of it. She doesn't explain her standards. She doesn't justify her boundaries. She doesn't water herself down to seem easier, more flexible, more accommodating. She simply knows who she is and what she brings. She knows what her love feels like when it's reciprocated with the same energy. She knows how calm and steady she becomes when she's with someone who values her properly. And she knows she will never experience that kind of connection if she keeps accepting half love out of habit or hope. Choosing herself is the quiet declaration that she's done betraying her own heart just to keep someone else close. It's the moment she promises herself she will not return to relationships that ask her to shrink. It's the moment she embraces her full worth without hesitation. In her 30s, she doesn't just know her value. She protects it. She honors it. She lives by it. She chooses herself with both hands, and because of that, half-love no longer stands a chance. So, here's what I found. Sigma women in their 30s no longer tolerate half-love because they've finally grown into themselves in a way that leaves no room for anything unclear or unstable. They've lived enough life to know what hurts them, what drains them, what confuses them, and what makes them lose pieces of who they are. They've watched themselves bend in the past, sometimes too far, just to make relationships feel balanced. They've watched themselves stay quiet to keep the peace, stay patient to feel hopeful, stay loyal to people who were only halfway present. And they aren't angry about those years. They simply learned from them. Now, they don't chase validation. If someone doesn't see their worth, they don't try to prove it. They don't beg for clarity. If someone's feelings are unclear, they don't hang around trying to decode mixed signals. They don't wait to be prioritized. If someone treats them like an option, they quietly remove themselves and choose a life where they're treated with intention. They choose love that feels steady, honest and respectful, or they choose nothing at all. And choosing nothing is no longer frightening. It's peaceful, it's grounding. It allows them to stay connected to themselves instead of getting lost in someone else's confusion. People often say Sigma women have high standards, but that isn't really true. Their standards aren't high. They're simply accurate. They know exactly what kind of love keeps them whole and what kind of love breaks them down. They know what consistency feels like. They know what emotional maturity looks like. They know what partnership should bring into their life and what it should never take away. Once they understand this, they don't settle. They can't. Something inside them refuses to shrink ever again just to keep someone else comfortable. They don't tolerate almost loved, almost chosen, almost seen. They want love that meets them with clarity, not confusion. They want someone who stands beside them with intention, not someone who drifts in and out depending on convenience. And if that kind of connection doesn't appear, they stay with themselves because they've learned that solitude with peace is better than companionship with uncertainty. If you've ever reached that point where half-love just wasn't enough anymore, tell me what changed inside you. Maybe it was a moment, maybe it was a slow realization, maybe it was the final disappointment that pushed you back toward yourself. Whatever it was, your story might be the reminder another Sigma woman needs tonight, especially one who's still trying to understand why her heart feels tired. And when you're ready, watch the next video on your screen. There's more truth waiting for you, more calm, more strength, more of the woman you've quietly been becoming for years. A version of you that doesn't settle, doesn't chase, and doesn't dilute herself for love. Trust me, you'll feel understood.